The first domino has fallen. Trajan Langdon is officially the Detroit Pistons president of basketball operations, and officially the bigger news here, Troy Weaver is officially no longer a part of the Detroit Pistons organization. We're going to talk about all this in today's episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Kuka Hill. You can find me over on Twitter at Kuka Hill. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review. And whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, is another great way to support the podcast. And this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. You'll hear more about Prize Picks a little bit later. But the biggest news, the breaking news, Troy Weaver, the GM of the Detroit Pistons for the last 4 years, has officially been removed from the organization. There is no speculation. There is no, waiting around. It is official. They have parted ways, and Troy Weaver is no longer a part of the Detroit Pistons organization. At the time they let him go, I should say, Trajan Langdon's hiring was not officially made, but literally probably like 5 minutes ago before I started recording, they made the official hiring of Trajan Langdon. And at the time, obviously, of them doing that, Troy was fired, or parted ways, but fired, and Monty remains. I think there's more changes on the way, but that is worth noting, I guess, that they made the hiring official, and only one of them is gone. So just keep that in mind. But obviously, let's just stay on the Troy Weaver thing, on his time here. And the decision to move on from Troy. So with Troy no longer being a part of the Pistons organization, I feel comfortable doing this. It is not disrespectful or out of bounds to say that Troy Weaver took over the Detroit Pistons with not many expectations at the time. A team that was entering a rebuild with quite literally, I'd say, only way should have been up. And somehow he fumbled it so badly that they got worse, and they suffered the worst season in franchise history. Not in one of the years when they were purposely losing. Not in one of those years. Not in one of the years when they were purposely trying to lose and get a top pick. The year they did it was the year they told everyone was the year they were trying to be better. And that's when they fell back on their faces. That's when they had the worst season in franchise history. Troy Weaver, from the get-go. And a lot of people were pointing this kind of stuff out from the get-go, but didn't want to go full-blown at Troy at the time. But now that he's gone, I mean, if you go read James Edwards and Shams' article that broke the news, they broke it down pretty well in that article as well. But Troy had red flags from the very beginning. When he first took over as the GM of the Detroit Pistons, the first moves he made involved trading for contracts and then extending them, giving up more value than needed to. And the excuse at the time was, well, it's not really going to hurt them right now, and he's going to get in his guys. He's doing what he needs to do to get what he wants right now, and it has minimal cause. Like, yeah, maybe he's losing a little value with that, but who cares, whatever. And the point that a lot of people made was the more you do take a little bit and a little bit and a little bit and a little bit less value and stuff, and you're taking a little bit and a little bit hits, if you keep doing it over and over and over and over and over again, eventually it becomes a big hit. Eventually it becomes a big deal. And that's exactly what happened with the Pistons. The asset management by Troy Weaver in this front office was nothing short of horrific. And it's mentioned in Shams and James Edwards III's article as well with The Athletic. The asset management was terrible. And it's something that I have complained about on this podcast for years. Ever since I took over this podcast, the asset management has been horrific. Moving guys after they're past their peak value, holding on to them too long, not getting the most value in return because you want to get your guy. The asset management was horrific and something that I loved. I absolutely loved seeing The Athletic point out in the breaking news, because they're the ones who broke it, the news that Troy was moving on. What I absolutely loved reading in that piece is something that I've said in this podcast. I think I've said it since the season ended when we started reflecting on Troy's time with the Pistons. Troy's first mistake from the get-go was deciding not to use the cap space, which, by the way, I need everyone to understand this because this is something I've had quite a few listeners mention to me, and it's a false belief that some Pistons fans have in the community. The Pistons were not in a bad cap situation when Troy took over. Literally, the reason why Troy took over the job, the reason why they were able to get Troy, is because they made sure to free up cap space the deadline beforehand, so a GM or a potential GM would have interest in taking over the team. They traded Drummond's contracts and got it off the books for simply expirings in what was it, John Henson and Brandon Knight's contracts. Those were just straight up expirings. They got that contract off the books. Reggie Jackson was off the books. The only contract that was really on the books like that was Blake's. They had cap space, which is why they were able in that immediate offseason to sign Jeremy Grant, to sign Mason Plumlee, to sign, even lower level guys, but like Josh Jackson and guys like that, because the Pistons made sure to clear the cap space, cap books as best as they could, so the next GM that came in could make stuff happen. And what most GMs would do, 99.99999% of GMs would do in a situation like that, would take on bad contracts to stack your assets for the future. And Troy did not do that. Instead, he used the cap space to spend on players for the immediate impact. Mason Plumlee was then moved with the second round pick for Kelly Olynyk. He was then I'm drawing a blank. Why am I Jeremy Grant? My goodness, I don't know why I just drew a blank. Jeremy Grant, I know for a fact, had better offers at the back end of his first year. I know for a fact he had good offers in the offseason that year. And they held on to Jeremy Grant until they eventually moved him for a 2025 first-round pick from the Milwaukee Bucks. They had better deals than that. And every single time Troy messed up and did a deal like that, the comeback from optimistic people was, well, he ended up being able to get his guy, Jalen Duren, out of those picks. That's not the point. The asset management and the decisions with assets from the get-go doomed the Pistons. It just doomed them. Because now you sit in 2024 when you have all these other rebuilding teams hitting their prime. They're hitting their prime of the rebuild with assets, with picks to make moves. The Houston Rockets, for example, but there's many teams, OKC, San Antonio, all these teams have assets. But let's just use Houston, for example, because they're the ones I'm most knowledgeable about. They have Sengun. They have Amen Thompson. They have all kinds of young players. And they can keep their main guy in Alperen Sengun. They can keep all the Cam Whitmore, a lot of their Tari Eason, all of their young guys. And if they want to go out now and get someone to add to that core to really take that next step, now they can package a Jalen Green with the 5,000 picks they got from the Brooklyn Nets when they made their rebuild. When they started their rebuild, to go get somebody. And I know the comeback to that will be what they had James Harden get rid of. That is not the only way you acquire assets. Yes, Troy Weaver did take over a team that didn't have tradable assets at that time. But that is not how you acquire assets. That's not the only way. You watch these teams over and over and over again. The OKC Thunder did it all the time. Take on bad contracts to get picks, to get assets. So then in a few years, you can use those assets to improve your team once you have used your own assets to add a young core. And instead, the Pistons did the exact opposite, and it doomed them from the get-go. Not only did they doom themselves from the get-go, the ace in the hole that everyone had for Troy, the ace in the hole that he had, the biggest excuse, the biggest thing that he had to, the thing he had to hold his cap on, that could have bailed him out, which we were told was what he had to hope would bail him out, was his talent evaluation. None of this is going to matter if he hits on his picks, which, okay, that's fair. But one, no GM is going to hit 1,000 on their draft picks. It's just not going to happen. That's one. And two, Troy did not do a good job with the talent evaluation, with the picks. The Pistons had 3 first-round picks in the 2020 draft. In that draft, you had the Tyrese Maxey, you had a Desmond Bane. There's on and on and on in that first round. The Pistons ended up with Killian Hayes, who, yes, everyone knows that, I believed in Killian becoming a backup point guard this past year. But Killian Hayes was a massive miss. He was waived this past year. And you had Tyrese Halliburton right after him. Missed there. Sadiq Bey. You took him instead of Desmond Bane or some of the other guys, and you traded Sadiq Bey. Instead of for multiple second-round picks, you went again and got your guy in James Wiseman, and he's been – let me not turn this into a James Wiseman, but he's not been good. He's not going to return to the team next year either. So just over Isaiah Stewart came out of that draft, but to get Isaiah Stewart, you gave up a future first that's still locked up. That was the first draft that he did. 2 misses and getting a guy who I think is a backup 5, got better, but you did it by doing that. You had to give a future first that is still locked up. Following draft, you get Cade. You get gifted a number 1 pick. That's the only one. You get gifted the number 1 overall pick where Cade was the clear-cut number 1, basically. Everyone knew Cade was 1. Second round, miss. Saban Lee, miss. You use second round picks on Davidas Savitas. He doesn't even really come over. Use a second round pick on Gabriel Procida. He doesn't even come over. Jane Ivey, there's question marks about. Jalen Duren, there's question marks about. Heck, I'm high on Asar Thompson, but there's question marks on Asar too. So, you took L's in asset management. You didn't stack the treasure chest of assets. You didn't take on bad contracts for it. You didn't build a competent team. And in the meanwhile, the thing that everyone told you said, or everything that you told people and people were told that would bail everyone out, despite all that bad stuff you did, all the other red flags didn't matter because you were a great drafter. And he wasn't a great drafter for the Pistons. Whether you agree with it or not, whether you feel like they should or not, everyone has to be realistic and understand that there is a future where the only picks that are on this team next year that Troy made is Cade and Asar. That is a realistic future. Now, whether they should or should not do is not what I'm saying. The fact that that's a realistic future for next year, that Troy spent 4 years making picks with this team, and as soon as the team moves on to another regime, that it's possible that only 2 picks remain, maybe more, but it's possible only 2 remain. In every facet of Troy's time with the Detroit Pistons, he failed in. They had the worst season in franchise's history, terrible asset management, didn't build a team. No one knows what the identity or vision of this team is. Doesn't make any sense. Didn't stack assets, and you didn't even draft well, which is what your big thing was supposed to be. I don't know. There's no other way to categorize Troy Weaver's time with the Detroit Pistons other than an utter failure at quite literally every aspect of building a team. At every aspect of building a team. And that's not emotion. That's not bias. That's not, anything else. That's fact. This is all facts that I just brought to the table. It's not unfair. This is all real. So I can't sit here and say I feel bad that Troy lost his job. I can't sit here and say that I didn't see it coming. I can't sit here and say that it was shocking. It deserved to happen. It should have happened during the season. But there you go. Troy's gone. New era. And I think most Pistons fans would say to that, thank God. When we come back, we'll continue talking about this and some other things to watch for. We'll talk about that when we come back. PrizePicks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It is the easiest, most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the playoff action. The NBA Finals are right around the corner. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the NBA Finals. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey, college basketball entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. And my favorite thing about PrizePicks is that, let's say you have a player in the first half of an NBA entry that you have, gets hurt, doesn't return the second half. that player is automatically rebooted with Prize Picks. That is not something that happens anywhere else. Prize Picks is amazing. It's why I think Prize Picks is the best out there, why I love it so much. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy with Prize Picks. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review or whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. Man, it's really hot in here, man. Every time I hit summer, you guys know this at listen. It gets really hot in here. I need to take a drink. Like, my goodness. I hate summertime in this place I live at. It just, oof. Anyways. Back to Troy Weaver and the Detroit Pistons. So, some things that also happened with Troy. The Detroit Pistons offered him a chance to stay on as a scout in a very, very, very reduced role. That's something that I had heard about a few weeks ago. And Troy denied it. Troy basically said, "No, I'm not taking that," and he just, he'd rather just be fired, basically. So Troy had a chance to stay on as a scout. I personally don't understand why the Pistons would want to keep him on as a scout, because he didn't do a very good job of talent evaluation with the Pistons over his 4 years. So I don't know why they would want to keep him there, but it is what it is. Either way, he didn't end up taking it. I want to keep going. I'm not going to lie to you guys. I kind of really want to keep talking about like what went wrong during these last 4 years, because this is basically, I think this is probably the last time we're going to talk about Troy Weaver, right? Like, I don't think we're going to mention him. We're going to talk about him anymore. I mean, I guess I should mention this first before we keep going on with Troy, though. The Athletic did also post an article talking about who's rumored to be Trajan Langdon's number 2, which is basically the GM that replaces Troy Weaver. Now, I've had a few people ask this. What's the difference between a president of basketball operations, and a general manager? So if you remember, Stan Van Gundy, he was the president of basketball operations with the Detroit Pistons. His GM was Jeff Bauer. And basically how it goes is Stan has final basketball say, or he did, but president of basketball operations, if you remember back to that time, they have the final say with everything that involves basketball-wise. Now, the GM helps them. They help, phone calls for trades, seek out value. They just help them do their jobs. But the president of basketball operations still makes the final decision. He makes the calls. He makes the shots. He takes the shots, or calls the shots. Why did I take the shots? We're not playing basketball, but calls the shots. So I know there's people saying, "Oh God, here you go." I saw some Pistons fans like, "Too many cooks in the kitchen." No, this is normal. This is not, crazy thing. This is normal. It's just a second guy to help him out, a guy that he wants to bring on that, helps him do some, his duties. But he still is like the guy at the top of the chain. Everything's going to him. Everything that gets decided, everything that gets done, it's going to be the president of basketball operations. He just has a second in command that's going to help him out and do his job. Basically, that's what it is. So I understand why Pistons fans who dealt with the last 4 years are like, "Oh my God, does this mean more cooks in the kitchen?" No, this is normal. Don't freak out. It's normal. Some of the names that they mentioned that could be the GM that Trajan brings over, Michael Blackstone from the New Orleans Pelicans. He's an executive over there. Matt Lloyd, he's currently the senior vice president of basketball operations for the Timberwolves. Travis Slank, I believe I said his name right, the vice president of player personnel for the Washington Wizards. He was also with the Atlanta Hawks for a few years at the back end of the 2010s. Brock Allaire, the New York Knicks vice president of basketball and strategic planning. And then also this name, this is going to, business fans that are a little bit older might freak out over this, but Tayshaun Prince. I don't know if people don't know this or not, but Tayshaun has been working in the front office for quite a bit now. He was promoted to Memphis's executive vice president of basketball operations in 2019. He's been in the Grizzlies organization since 2017. So he's been working behind the scenes to grow and become eventually, I'm assuming his end goal is to be like a GM or a president of basketball operations eventually. So he's been working. So those are the names to keep an eye on as of right now for who he's going to bring over. It sounds like from reports that the favorite right now is Michael Blackstone from the New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, Trajan just worked with him. It's coming over from New Orleans as well. I saw a few New Orleans guys tweeting and reporting that if Blackstone leaves, that New Orleans sounds like they're sizing themselves up for Blackstone to leave and have some guys ready to replace him. So it sounds like Blackstone is the favorite. However, he is not officially signed, hired. It's not official anything yet, but it seems like he is the leader in the clubhouse right now. So that's where we're at with that. As soon as we get any news with that, obviously I'm going to drop a podcast. As soon as we get any news with this is what we've been waiting for. Like this little awkward time, this like week from where Trajan was reportedly hired, not even officially, but reportedly hired, and nothing being said about Troy or Monty, and still not getting the official hiring. Like this week was like kind of awkward. It was just like everyone was just sitting, waiting for something to happen. So yeah, as soon as anything else that keeps coming out with this, obviously you guys know I'm gonna be out there instantly with you guys, trying to get you guys an episode and some content breaking down everything. But I mean, I go back to Troy for just a moment. Because like I said earlier, this is probably the last time we're going to talk about Troy's time with the Pistons. Or really, and maybe he might get brought up, but last time I really want to like dive into his time with the Pistons. There's a part of me, actually not even a part of me, basically like entirety of me, that seriously wonders what would have happened if the Pistons did not get the number 1 overall pick in 2021. Now, I know there's going to be people that say, well, nothing did happen. They got it and nothing's happened, which is fair. But I can assure you that Cade is one of the main reasons why people were interested in this job at all. Like Cade is the big selling point. Whether you are a fan of him or not, I can tell you for a fact with what I know, Cade is obviously the big selling point. Like that, he is the, what's brings anyone any interest to Detroit. So I wonder how bad this could have got if they did not get number 1. Like, what if they got 4th in that draft? What if they got 5th? Like, what would have happened if they didn't end up with Cade and instead ended up with, like, Jalen Suggs? Like, what happens? Like, how bad does this actually get? Because Troy, I honestly, it's remarkable and shocking to go and look back at everything that's happened with Troy and this team over the last 4 years. Because I don't think anyone can really pick, like, his most shining moment, I think, is this trade for Simone Fontecchio. I think that was the best move he's made. But outside of that, there's not many bright spots at all to this tenure. I don't think you can say they used free agency well. Not only did I mentioned this earlier, that he didn't hit on his picks, but what I didn't mention was, or let me not say he didn't hit on any of his picks, but he did not nearly enough to save his job for that to be betting on for that to be what he's betting on. Like I said earlier, it's very possible. It's a chance that only 2 guys are remaining next year from his draft class. But what I didn't mention was the second chance guys he took on, like the second contract dudes, the guys he identified as, okay, didn't work out with this team, think it can work out here. We can get the most out of them. And teams do that, and it works out. Sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes it does. Sometimes you find that diamond in the rough, you develop them correctly, and now they hit their potential. Like, that happens. And taking on the second contract guy, taking a chance, like, that happened. That is very routine. Teams do that. And, like I said, some hit, some don't. Every single one the Pistons did missed. Every single one. Like, quite literally every single one. Frank Jackson, miss. Josh Jackson, miss. Jahlil Okafor, miss. James Wiseman, miss. Kevin Knox, miss. There wasn't one second chance dude that they hit on. So asset management, terrible. Didn't stack up the assets, terrible. Didn't make good free agent signings, terrible. Didn't build a good team at any point, terrible. This past offseason, punted the offseason and didn't address anything, which led to the worst season in franchise history, terrible. Didn't hit on second-round picks, any. Quite literally none. Miss. Then he doesn't hit on any second chance contract guys, second contract dudes. Missed on all of them. miss, terrible. Like, I'm not joking when I say you could probably go through quite literally every aspect of the last 4 years. And you could probably say every single aspect was a failure. It's honestly remarkable. Like, I kid you not, I'm not joking. It is remarkable how badly these 4 years went. Like I said, there was a point over these 3 years where it was like you can only go up. Who knows how much higher you go? Maybe it doesn't go much higher. Like, that was possible. That, okay, maybe this rebuild doesn't go well, but at least it will go up to a certain point. But it got worse. It just kept getting worse. Look, I'm happy that the Pistons made moves. They should have made the move during the season, in my opinion, by waiting out of respect for people. I get it, but I think most Pistons fans are very happy today. And I don't see how anyone could blame them with how badly the last 4 years went for the Detroit Pistons. So I think that's it, man. I think that's the last we're going to mention Troy. The Troy Weaver era is done. The restore era finished, and they didn't restore anything. He destroyed everything. So that's how it wraps up. When we come back, that's one domino. Troy's gone. Someone still remains. Is he going to be back next year? Talking about Monty Williams. So we'll talk about that when we come back. So I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on our podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe on the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. So, as of my recording right now, because it's possible that some stuff goes down as soon as I publish this, because this is usually how it works. Like this, I feel like this happens damn near every time I record a podcast like this, breaking down some news. Like something I'm recording, either it happens while I'm recording or right after I publish it. All of a sudden, some other stuff happens. That's just my luck. You guys remember during the season why I forget what it was. I forget what it was, but I quite literally had waited until 10 o'clock to record the podcast, and then I recorded it. And then while we were record was going, it happened. I forget what it was. Long-term listen, I got here. You guys remember what it was, but I remember that moment. I was furious, but that's usually how it goes. Anyways, as this time, Monty is still the head coach of the Detroit Pistons. Now, how can I say this? I want to be careful with what I say. If I was a betting man, I would probably bet that Monty is not returning. I'd say the logic matches with if Trajan comes in. I mean, I feel like anybody who comes in, they would want to have their own guys. They would like to go start a new regime, start a new rebuild with their guys, especially when you're taking over a situation that just witnessed the worst season in franchise history. I feel like the logic points to, okay, I want to have my own guys, get rid of everything that was associated with that. We're going to bring in our dudes and we're going to turn this around. That is what the logical thing says. So that's one. Two, actually, I'm going to leave it at that. That's all I'm going to leave it at for right now. Now, is there a chance that he returns? Yes, there is a chance that he returns. I'm not ruling it out. But I would bet, if I had to put money on it, I would bet that he's not returning. And we'll leave it at that. That's what I would say. I'm gonna bet that he probably wouldn't return. That's it. But I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, I think it's incredibly interesting. Now, this part, I find this part really interesting. That the Pistons did not make Trajan's hiring official until today, an hour ago. They waited until Weaver was officially gone before they announced it. They didn't do that with Monty. They announced it with Monty still on the team and nothing said about it. Now, in those articles breaking it down, or breaking news, the Athletic are breaking that Troy was gone, nothing was mentioned about Monty. In the press release about the Pistons officially hiring Trajan, nothing was said about Monty. Not a single thing. So I feel like it feels like publicly, it feels like things are being very quiet, and they are avoiding if publicly avoiding any mention of Monty right now. To me, from an outside perspective, just looking, if I was a fan looking at this, I would say that seems pretty interesting. And that seems to point to them being undecided at the very least. And that, I mean, that's how I'd read into it. The fact that Monty's just not being mentioned at all right now. Like, it's just completely not he's not mentioned in the least bit. That would point, if I was a fan looking at it, I would look at it and say, seems like they're at the very least undecided right now what's going on. And the future is very murky, at the very least murky for Monty. So I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting. So we'll see. I'd have to assume you'd get news on whether Monty's coming back or not within the week. Like, because Trajan in the press release mentioned that he wants to get started quickly on trying to, build this team this offseason and get started with his plan. Like, you need to know who your head coach is. So I figured I'm almost 100. I'm at like 99.999% sure telling you guys that the next move of business is deciding whether Monty's going to be the coach next year. So I'd have to assume that would be something, if they're telling the truth that they want to get started quickly, like I'd have to assume by the end of the week they would have to come to that decision with Monty. So and also, you got people interviewing for coaching jobs right now. You got the Lakers search going on. Do they want to lose maybe there's a guy out there that they like. Maybe there's a guy out there that they like that potentially could be gone if you wait too long. Like that's something that comes up too. So I think we'll get a decision whether it's he stays or gone. I'd have to assume pretty quickly, like at this point now. So we'll see what happens. So let me know in the comment section down below how you guys feel. Think this is a good move? Should Monty return? Should he be fired? Let me know how you guys feel. That's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. Free and available on our podcast platforms. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. Till next time, peace out.